Welcome to the Configuring Policies lesson of the Symantec Endpoint Protection Cloud Product Overview training course. This is the Configuring Policies lesson. In this lesson, you learn how to configure and manage the policies included in SEP Cloud. This is the SEP Cloud Policies topic. After completing this topic, you will be able to describe the types of policies included in SEP Cloud. The Policies page provides an overview of the policies configured in SEP Cloud and lets you do the following: view all policies that exist in the system, view policies by type in separate tabs, search for existing policies by the policy name, and manage policies. In SEP Cloud, you create and apply policies on enrolled devices. There are three types of policies in SEP Cloud: System, Security, and Access. A system policy lets you configure the settings that security clients use when they communicate with Symantec Endpoint Protection Cloud. For optimum management of the security clients, use the Symantec Recommended System Policy, which is included by default in Endpoint Protection Cloud. With a system policy, you can schedule the client live update schedule to maximize performance and effectiveness in low bandwidth or low connectivity environments. Configure proxy settings if you use a proxy for internet access. Currently, a system policy applies to Windows devices only. In SEP Cloud, the security policy defines the main security goals and helps in building the security framework for an organization. SEP Cloud enables you to create and impose policies to protect your computers based on the security requirements of the devices. When a device is added, it is immediately added to the default group and the default policy for protection. In SEP Cloud, an access policy defines the type and extent of access to IT assets and other organizational resources that users are allowed to have. In general, access policies can be of various types, such as email, Wi-Fi, VPN, printer access, and mapped drives. SEP Cloud currently supports email and wireless access policies. This is the Configuring Systems Policies topic. After completing the topic, you will be able to configure system policies. A system policy lets you configure the settings that security clients use when they communicate with Symantec Endpoint Protection Cloud. You can apply only one system policy per group. Each of these policies is composed of components, which are the building blocks of the system policy. For example, a system policy can have one or more of the following components: client update schedule that provides choice for infrequently used or low bandwidth connections, and proxy settings for connections to a web proxy server. SEP Cloud provides a default system policy called Symantec Recommended System Policy. The default system policy cannot be modified and will be applied to the default group automatically. Should you need to make changes, however, you can create a copy of the existing system policy and then customize the copy for your specific needs. The first step in creating a system policy is to select Create System Policy from the menu. The first information that must be entered is the policy name and an optional description of the policy. The Client Update Schedule section allows you to configure the Symantec Live Update schedule used to send updates to Endpoint Protection Cloud security clients. If your environment includes devices that connect to your network infrequently or use a low bandwidth connection, client updates may be delayed or they may degrade performance on the device. You can use this system policy setting to schedule client updates to reduce any negative impact that security updates may have. If a company uses a proxy server to access the internet, you can use the proxy settings in a system policy to configure access to the proxy by Endpoint Protection Cloud. Provide the IP address and port to use, and if authentication is required, provide the username and password. This is the Configuring Security Policies topic. After completing the topic, you will be able to configure security policies. The security policy components are the building blocks of a security policy. These components, in turn, have settings that need to be configured when defining a policy. These settings are the controls that ensure that the scope of the policy is covered and that safeguards are in place to mitigate potential risks. A collection of similar settings is grouped under one component. For example, the password protection component contains related settings such as password length, expiration, and maximum failed attempts. Components of protection that can be used in a security policy are device protection, scan schedule, scan exclusions, network protection, connected storage devices, device encryption, password protection, device controls, web protection, and application protection. Combined, these components offer a defense in-depth security solution. SEP Cloud provides a default security policy called Symantec Recommended Security Policy. The default security policy may serve your organization well. However, you can manage the security policies in many ways. For example, you can create copies of existing security policies and then customize the copies for your specific needs. You can also lock and unlock certain settings so that users cannot change them on their devices. The policy icon indicates the strength of a policy, which can be secure, green, moderate, yellow, or weak, red. The policy strength indicator is an indication of policy strength and effectiveness. A secure score means a strong security policy, and a weak score means a lower security policy. The score is derived from the policy components, with some components being more heavily weighed than others in determining the score. The policy strength indicator is only applicable to security policies. To create a security policy, a user needs to have the administrator role. In general, to create a security policy, you must select the appropriate policy components and configure the associated settings. To begin, choose the Create Security Policy menu option on the policy's homepage. This brings up the Security Policy Details page, which contains the individual components to be configured. The individual components vary in the devices that support them. The icons shown indicate the devices that are supported by that component. The first information that must be entered is the policy name and an optional description of the policy. The device protection settings optimize user devices by protecting them from risky and low reputation files, zero-day threats, network or browser-based malware, and phishing attacks. The various settings that can be enabled or disabled are as follows. Real-time file scanning, also known as auto protect, scans files as they are read from or written to the device, inspects all files for viruses and security risks, and blocks their installation. If you disable real-time file scanning, you also disable application behavior monitoring. File reputation assessment, also known as Insight or Download Insight, detects a malicious file or potentially malicious file when you try to download the file from a browser or a text messaging client. If you disable file reputation assessment, you also limit the ability of application behavior monitoring to make detections. Application behavior monitoring, also known as sonar, searches for suspicious attributes and possible virus signatures while applications run, detects threats before traditional virus definitions can be created to address them. Most settings include the option to allow the end user to temporarily disable the setting if they choose to do so. The scan schedule setting lets you specify when to scan your device. You can run the scans at the same time every day or on selected days of the week. You can specify if a given scan schedule is applied to all devices or only to servers. You can exclude mapped network drives, removable drives, individual files, file types, and folders from security scans to improve scan performance and prevent false positive detections. Although scan exclusions can reduce the time and resources required to complete security scans, excluded files are no longer protected from viruses and other security threats. Consider the trade-offs before you exclude files. If necessary, you can remove files from an exclusion list to make sure that they are protected. The following settings are available. Mapped network drives excludes all network drives mapped on desktops and laptops, Windows devices only. Removable drives excludes all removable media attached to desktops and laptops, Windows devices only. Folder exclusions excludes all files in a specified folder from security scans. File exclusions excludes files based on the file name. File extension exclusions excludes all files of a specific type based on their extension. The network protection components let you control network-based protection on devices in your network. The rules-based firewall prevents unauthorized users from accessing a device. The firewall level lets you control the incoming network traffic and outgoing network traffic between networks. Changing levels configures associated network services such as file and print sharing and remote desktop. These services can also be configured individually using the slide controls. The intrusion prevention system automatically detects and blocks network attacks. Firewall rules provide visibility into the rules enabled by the firewall protection level. Default rules cannot be edited, deleted, or reordered. However, additional rules can be created if required. These settings do not apply to servers and are ignored. The Connected Storage Device option lets you limit access to connected components on user devices by specifying the device as read-write, read-only, or block. Block denies all access to the device. Device encryption lets you manage the encryption status of enrolled devices. Encryption management is turned off by default, so that all devices retain their current state, encrypted by its user, encrypted by a third party, or unencrypted. You can encrypt the boot drive of OS X and Windows client devices. Windows servers are not supported. Symantec Encryption Management uses the following tools to encrypt the boot drive and then stores the recovery key in Symantec Security Cloud. OS X uses native File Vault 2 encryption, and Windows uses native BitLocker encryption. It also requires a Trusted Platform Module, or TPM, to be running on the device. Symantec Endpoint Encryption Management is an add-on to Symantec Endpoint Protection Cloud that you can purchase separately. For a limited time, however, encryption management is available as a free trial. This setting applies only to Windows, OS X, and Android devices. Before you encrypt OS X devices, review the manual steps that are required to decrypt them. The Password Complexity option prevents unauthorized access to user devices by enforcing the passcode requirements that you specify. Password length is the number of characters that are required in short, medium, and long passwords for the different device platforms. Password complexity specifies whether letters, numbers, or special characters are required for the different device platforms. Expiration, the length of time before users must change their passwords. Reuse limitations, the number of recent passwords that cannot be used again by the user. Idle time, the length of time that a device remains unlocked before a password is required to unlock the device. And maximum failed attempts indicates the number of times that a user can try to sign into a device and fail before the device is locked. Device controls let you disable the camera on a device to help prevent data theft. There is no clear warning or other notification that the camera is disabled. Web protection helps prevent malware from exploiting browser vulnerabilities that attackers can use to steal sensitive information or control the system remotely. This setting applies to Windows devices only. Application protection settings are enabled using Memory Exploit Mitigation, or MEM. MEM uses multiple mitigation techniques to stop attacks on a vulnerability in the application. To stop an exploit, Memory Exploit Mitigation injects a DLL into a protected application. After Memory Exploit Mitigation detects the exploit attempt, it either blocks the exploit or terminates the application it threatens. MEM continues to block the exploit or terminate the application until the client computer runs a version of the software where the vulnerability is fixed. By default, the feature is enabled in the recommended security policy, and a warning message is displayed if disabled. This is the Configuring Access Policies topic. After completing the topic, you will be able to configure access policies. An access policy lets you control if and how users can access company resources on their devices. You can apply only one of each type of access policy to a group. Each of these policies is composed of components which are the building blocks of the access policy. These components are used based on the scope of the policy and the employed security measures. The access policy components are further broken down to specific settings. These settings are the controls that ensure that the scope of the policy is covered and adequate access to IT assets and resources is provided. A collection of similar settings is grouped under one component. For example, the email settings is a group of similar settings that enable an administrator to configure access to the relevant mail server and domain, along with other email access related settings. SEP Cloud currently supports email and wireless access policies. The first step in creating an access policy is to select Create Access Policy from the menu and then choose which policy type you would like to create. Regardless of which access policy type you are creating, the first information that must be entered is the policy name and an optional description of the policy. When configuring an email access policy, in the Email Settings section, you configure the following: the server name, the name of the mail server that you want users to access email from, currently supports only Exchange server accounts, the domain name, the email access domain name in the form of example.com, sync period. To save storage space on all devices, you can set the number of past days of emails that can be synchronized. For example, sync period equals 3 days means that emails from the last 3 days can be downloaded and synchronized on user devices. And for iOS, the mailbox migration setting determines if users can move company email to personal devices. Device restrictions prevent access to email from devices that are not in a secure state. The following settings are available. Ownership type: apply policy only to company-owned devices. Specify whether you want to apply the email access policy only on a company-owned device or to any device. Security status: you can remove email access if the device is compromised or at risk. By default, company email access is restricted on compromised devices. The current optional settings pertain to SSL encryption. SSL encryption is enabled by default, and we recommend that you keep this setting enabled if you want to protect confidential information such as usernames, passwords, and credit card numbers. With a wireless access policy, you can configure access to a company wireless network and restrict it based on the device status or ownership. Connection and security settings include network name. Specify the wireless network name or SSID that identifies your wireless network to users and other wireless devices. Auto join network lets you decide whether you want devices to automatically join this wireless network when it is available. Network visibility lets you decide whether you want to show this network when devices perform a scan for available wireless networks. The security settings security type lets you control the method of authentication and encryption used by your wireless network. Symantec recommends that you use the WPA/WPA2 security type for maximum protection. Similar to an email access policy, the wireless policy also provides the ability to apply the policy only to company-owned devices and remove access to the wireless network based upon the security status of the device. Optional proxy settings allows you to select an authentication method to configure a proxy server for your Wi-Fi network. This is the Managing Policies topic. After completing the topic, you will be able to manage policies. To use a policy, you must apply it to one or more groups. If you want to change the settings of an existing policy, you can edit it. Your changes go into effect as soon as you save them. The Symantec recommended security and system policies cannot be modified. If your policy requirements are similar to an existing policy, you may want to duplicate the existing policy to use as the basis for the new policy. You can customize the copied settings to meet your requirements and save the policy with a new name. If an existing policy is no longer in use, you can delete it to keep your policy list clean. You can delete a policy only if that policy is not assigned to a group. Just a reminder that the Symantec recommended system policy and the Symantec recommended security policy are unique. They can only be applied or duplicated. The other policy management options, such as edit and delete, are not available. In this lesson, you learned how to configure and manage system, security, and access policies.